Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council's Cabinet Planning and Parking Panel. This meeting will be held on the Zoom app. I know that the main agenda item today is one that is of particular interest to many residents across the borough of Welwyn Hatfield, and would like to note my own sadness that this meeting could not take place face-to-face due to the infection rates still being high. Should there be a loss of connectivity for this meeting for any reason, there may be a temporary adjournment and the meeting will resume once connectivity is re-established. In the unlikely event that reconnectivity is not possible, this meeting may need to be adjourned to another date. May I remind members to keep your microphones on mute at all times when you are not speaking. When you wish to speak, please use the raise hand function. Any votes will be taken by a physical show of hands. When the vote is called, members will be asked to show their hands to indicate for, against, or abstentions. Please keep your hands raised until the count is completed by the governance officers for each. I will now take this time to introduce the members present tonight. They are councillors Stephen Bolton, Alistair Hillier, Steve McNamara, George Michaelides, Drew Richardson, Craig Stanbury, Sunny Dusu, Russ Platt, Jane Quinton, Isha Rahal, Glyn Hayes, and Pancake Shah. I'll now move on to the agenda. Agenda item number 1, substitutions. Brad.
There have been no substitutions.
Thank you. Agenda item number 2, apologies.
There are no apologies.
Thank you. Agenda item number 3. Can I ask members to confirm as a correct record the minutes of the meeting held on the 16th of December 2021? Can I ask you to do that via showing of hands? If you agree, of course. Thank you. Jonah, is that okay?
I confirm that's unanimous.
Thank you. Agenda item number 4, notification of urgent business. I don't believe we have any urgent business.
I confirm, Chair, we have no urgent business.
Thank you. Agenda item number 5. Can I invite members to make any declaration of interest in relation to items on the agenda? Councillor Stephen Bolton.
Thank you, Chairman. Hertfordshire County Council.
Thank you. And Councillor Sunny Dusu.
Also Hertfordshire County Councillor.
Great. Thank you. Agenda item number 6. We now move on to public question time and petitions from the public. We have had no petitions, but we have received 7 questions from members of the public. Usually, up to 30 minutes are allowed. At my discretion, this may be extended to ensure all questions submitted on time will be heard. All those who have submitted questions have agreed for the governance officer to read them out. Copies of the questions have been shared with panel members ahead of this meeting and will not be read out. Well, in fact, they will be read out, so they will be. So the first question we have is from Welwyn Parish Council.
Thank you, Chair. Welwyn Parish consists of 3 major settlements, Welwyn Village, Digswell, and Oaklands and Mardley Heath, that are deeply connected to each other across their communities, resources, and infrastructure. Welwyn and Digswell have grown up over centuries within the confines of the surrounding landscape and are hemmed in and divided by hillsides, river valleys, a motorway, and a built environment that goes back centuries. Oaklands and Mardley Heath are essentially 20th century, but suffer from the total absence of any planned amenities such as a village hall or even a children's play area, and there is nowhere to place such. These settlements sit at the edge of the borough boundary, and so they are also affected at first hand by developments in neighbouring boroughs such as North Herts, East Herts, and Stevenage. After a comprehensive programme of development in recent years, there are now no substantial brownfield sites left for new developments in or around these settlements. As a result, all the sites that were put forward for inclusion in the local plan in 2019 were cited in the Greenbelt. However, in order to bolster the sustainability credentials, these sites needed to be added onto one of the existing settlements. settlements which have already undergone considerable expansion in recent years or are already living with the consequences of expansion of nearby settlements such as Codicott and Nebworth, without any corresponding expansion of local amenities or infrastructure. Based upon WHBC's own data, Welwyn Village has consistently since 1995 been number 3 in the borough for new developments after Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield. No mean feat for a village and indicative of its major growth over that period. According to our analysis of published Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council housing data over the last 10 years, housing stock across the whole borough grew by 10.1% in the period 2011 to 2021. During that time, Hatfield housing stock grew by 11.8% and Welwyn Garden Cities by 10%. Brookmans Park, Little Heath and Welwyn Green and Cuffley grew respectively by 7.2%, 1.8%, 3.1% and 6.3%, whereas Welwyn Parish's 4 settlements together expanded by 12.6%, with Welwyn Village itself growing by 22.7%. The local schools at Welwyn, Oaklands and Digswell are full and their expansion would be extremely difficult and expensive. Only Welwyn could be expanded due to land constraints, and that would probably involve major demolition and rebuilding. The road network grinds to a halt for the consequences of a broken sewage pipe in Welwyn Garden City and a carriageway closure on the motorway of 500 new homes in Codicott. Only the traffic reductions brought by COVID have given any relief of late to the peak hour through traffic along Welwyn High Street. The lone GP surgery has not managed to keep up with the growing population, witnessed the complaints and difficulty in getting a GP appointment. Local shops suffer due to a continual reduction in parking capacity to alleviate traffic problems. There is no scope for additional roadworks or new amenity buildings as the settlements are hemmed in by their natural barriers. The draft of the local plan that was reviewed by the CPPP last September would see Welwyn Parish growing by 15.9% by the end of the local plan period compared against 2011. While this is on a similar par with Brookmans Park, 16%, Cuffley, 15.5%, and Little Heath, 17.4%, Welwyn Village itself would have grown by 27.3%. This analysis has already been shared with Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council's Planning Department and no correction has been received back, so we assume they are in agreement with it. This CPPP meeting will be revisiting at the inspector's request certain sites that were previously not included in the draft local plan. These sites include Well 1, Well 2, Well 6 and Well 15 in Welwyn and Dig 1 in Digswell. If these were to be included in the local plan, Welwyn Village would have grown by 42.8% by 2036 and Digswell by 27.5%. The Digswell case is advanced largely on the premise that it is close to the station. Yes, it is, but there is no other infrastructure there, narrow pavements, already a road safety hazard, and roads without footways as well. That development would prejudice the fine view of the viaduct from Chewin Water and the reverse view. The bus service to Digswell is poor and the local parking at the station difficult. Welwyn Parish is already full, its roads are clogged, its schools are oversubscribed, village shops are struggling due to a lack of parking. Expansion of the size suggested would leave it no longer a village but another town, without any of the benefits of such due to the small space. How can the unique community spirit, much prized rural atmosphere and the historic heritage of the 3 settlements be expected to survive against such an onslaught of unmitigated and unrelenting development? Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Now I'm going to invite Councillor Stephen Bolton to respond.
Thank you, Chairman. The statement that precedes the question refers to analysis carried out by the Parish Council. This includes analysis of data on settlement growth in the 10 years between 2011 to 2021. The analysis takes the number of dwellings from 2011 census as its baseline and applies the total number of completed new developments up to 2021. To demonstrate the impact of allocations to 2036, the parish has used data on site selection from an earlier meeting of this panel. Analysis of data relating to the plan period 2016 to 2036 and options C and D is as follows. Welwyn has seen the highest level of growth since the start of the plan period in 2016 as a percentage of its dwelling stock. Data shows that in the 5 years between 2016 and 2021, Welwyn has seen around 10% growth. This is largely resulting from the development of brownfield sites at the Frith and the Clock. In terms of the number of new dwellings, for Welwyn, this growth is about 166 dwellings over the 5 years. While percentage of growth is lower in Hatfield at 6% over the same period, Hatfield has seen some 850 new dwellings, while Welwyn Garden City saw about 1,280 new dwellings, an increase of 6% on existing dwellings. Welwyn is identified in the settlement hierarchy as a third-tier settlement, a village excluded from the Green Belt, along with Brookmans Park, Welham Green and Cuffley. This means it is a secondary focus for development after Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield. Under option D, Welwyn's 16% growth on existing housing stock during the plan period would be less than Brookmans Park, 39%, Welham Green, 34%, and Cuffley at 22%. Settlements within the same tier as Welwyn in the settlement hierarchy. Under option C, this would rise to 31% for Welwyn and Cuffley, 51% for Brookmans Park, and 42% for Welham Green. The council does not agree with the premise of the question.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. I now pass it back to Brad for the second question, which is from Mr. David Cheek.
Thank you, Chair. In the part of the local plan examination document EX273 that concerns sites World 1, 2, 6 and 15, the inspector repeats his belief that the lack of any objection to these developments arising from their effects on Singler's Marsh is somehow proof that there'd be no such problems arising for Singler's Marsh. The effect on Singler's Marsh was not consulted on at the time because it would be used for access to get to those sites. Statutory bodies that we have contacted have confirmed that not only were they not asked their opinion about these proposals for Singler's Marsh, but they have substantial objections as they are waiting to raise when asked. To claim that an absence of objection is confirmation of no objection is untenable. The Hertfordshire and Middlesex Wildlife Trust has confirmed, contrary to what EX273 states, it has never been asked an opinion about developing Singler's Marsh to widen the access road and build an extra bridge. Should it be asked, it expects to oppose any such plans based on measurable damage to the local ecology, in particular to the ecosystem of the chalk stream. The Environmental Agency has confirmed that it has not been consulted and that it has several concerns with the plans that would need to be addressed before it would approve them. Affinity Water has also confirmed that it has not been consulted and that it has major concerns that would lead to strong objections on statutory grounds. The inspector stated that the extra road runoff and pollution of the chalk stream caused by increased traffic levels would be mitigated by improved filtration. However, this is impossible to assess as this is not based on any submitted evidence which was confirmed in correspondence with his programme officer. Though consultation about the individual sites around Singler's Marsh has been comprehensive, highlighting in several cases too much optimism in the HELAA studies, it is now clear and demonstrable that no consultation about Singler's Marsh itself has ever occurred. The inspector's report makes no mention at all of one other major obstacle to any delivery of these sites, despite it having been discussed in detail during the inspector's hearing. Singler's Marsh is the subject of an application to register it as a village green, which would make delivery of the road access plans for Well 1, etc. near impossible. HCC confirmed that the application has been duly made, and since Singler's Marsh was not included in the local plan, that at that stage, this that this did not become a trigger event. HCC have now decided that the application should be submitted to a public inquiry at a date yet to be determined. Should an inquiry decide in favour of granting village green status, any work undertaken in the interim would have to be reinstated. If Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council does determine to include any of the sites, Well 1, Well 2, Well 6 or Well 15 in the local plan, will WHBC confirm that a specific consultation about the effects on Singles Marsh will be held prior to the planning application stage? Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Can I now invite Councillor Stephen Bolton to respond?
Thank you, Chairman. There are several inaccuracies in the statement that precedes the question, specifically in relation to the engagement with the consultation bodies. Unlike the County Council or the Environment Agency, the Hertfordshire and Middlesex Wildlife Trust is not a statutory consultee that would be consulted as part of a technical assessment for the deliverability of a site. As an environmental group, they are one of several other types of bodies, groups and organisations that, as stated in the Statement of Community Involvement, the Council considers are important to consult. Such bodies, groups and organisations have had the opportunity to make representations at every stage of consultation during the local plan examination. They will be able to make further representations as part of the consultation of the main modifications. Affinity Water, as water undertaker, are consulted as part of the preparation of the local plan and have had the opportunity to provide representations at each consultation stage. They will also be consulted as part of the main modification consultation. Whilst Affinity Water were consulted on different distributions of dwellings, which included Well 1, 2, 6 and 15, they were not specifically consulted on the access proposals, as a new bridge over the river and widening of the access road would not impact on the water company's ability to supply water. It is understood that a change in staff at the Environment Agency resulted in an incorrect statement being given that the agency had not been consulted. The Environment Agency has been consulted throughout the preparation of the local plan, and recent discussions on site access to sites Well 1, 2, 6 and 15 has taken place. It should be noted that in coming to a view on whether the sites are deliverable, the inspector needs to be satisfied that access to the sites is possible. A sufficient level of technical detail is needed to demonstrate there are no, in principle, or show-stopping issues. The inspector does not need to approve a specific access proposal. Rather, he needs to be satisfied there is a likelihood within the plan period of access that an access can be provided. Precise details of any required access will form part of the detailed planning application and subject to consultation. A public consultation on a specific access proposal is not appropriate at the local plan allocation stage, as a consulted upon scheme would not be binding on a future owner of the sites. Should the sites be selected for inclusion in the plan, the Council considers that a full consultation with the public and stakeholders should take place. This should be undertaken when a detailed design is proposed as part of the preparation for planning application, as any mitigation would need to relate to the details of the scheme. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. We now move on to question number 3, which is from Mr. Russell Hagar.
Thank you, Chair. On behalf of the Welwyn Planning and Amenity Group, I would like the following question to be asked at the CWP meeting on the 13th of January. In document EX273/ED273, the inspector discusses the possibility of introducing into the local plan certain sites that were previously rejected by councillors. Within the area of the Welwyn parish, these include Dig 1, Well 1, 2, 6 and 15. Although this document is supposed to summarise the key points arising from the hearing into these sites, it misses out several key topics that were discussed in those hearings. It makes various sweeping statements that do not appear to be built upon any evidence submitted via the hearings or indeed any other means. In the case of well 1, 2, 6 and 15, paragraphs 42 to 50, we are concerned about the claims that A, Kimpton Road can be developed as an alternative to widening Filling Mill Lane, despite evidence submitted about the clear unsuitability for extra traffic on the road network into Kimpton Road, which Kimpton Road feeds. B, the sites are generally sustainable despite well 1 being 1 kilometre from any public transport, ignoring detailed discussion into the hearings about people in those homes driving to work in Welwyn Garden City or St Albans rather than locally, and noting that the railway station car park cannot take any more cars apart from during the pandemic. C, Singler's Marsh is only a minor inconvenience to developing these sites, despite his knowledge of an ongoing application to register it as a village green. D, these 4 sites can be considered separately from each other, despite the developer of well 1, 2 and 15 stating on record that all 3 sites need to be developed together and that it would be uneconomical to develop fewer than all 3 of them at once. E, these sites can afford the development of an expanded road network around Kimpton Road when the developer made clear that they had only made plans for widening Filling Mill Lane, and which HCC has since clarified that these would need to be revised substantially in the view of other developments on the road network in the 7 years since those plans were drawn up. F, Singler's Marsh's environmental value can be easily discarded in favour of development, despite WHBC's management plan for this land making clear that all of it is to be nurtured and managed for the advancement of its natural environment and ecology. And G, the Mimram's rare, precious and fragile chalk stream environment would actually benefit from development, despite the inspector's planning officer clarifying subsequently that no evidence had been submitted to support this claim. In the case of Dig 1, paragraphs 51 to 59, the inspector agrees that the originally proposed 180 homes would be an overdevelopment of this site, but then goes on to propose arbitrary amendments to the scheme which he believes would be acceptable. He has taken no evidence about whether these changes would actually address the concerns that were raised, including those that came from statutory consultees such as Historic England. His own proposals fails to address key problems that it would raise. A, moving the site's access northwards would violate covenants in force on all the properties along New Road. These covenants have been in place specifically to block such development. It is unclear how many homes, B, it is unclear how many homes he suggests for the reduced site. He states that the original 180 would be too many, and he also claims that 130 would be too many. How many is he actually suggesting? C, there is no evidence of how small the development would need to be in order to be acceptable to Historic England, leaving the application open to challenge. D, his views on sustainable journeys from this site are more optimistic than the rules which he has applied to other sites. The journey to the shops in Knightsfield would be no easier than from Well 1 to the shops in Welwyn High Street. E, as with Well 1, etc., his proposals are not based on any evidence around the economies of a reduced or modified site. In the case of Dig 1, the developer would still need to build an access road regardless of the site size and modify the junctions into New Road and Hertford Road, as well as upgrading sewage capacity already at full stretch and mitigating water runoff into the Mimran Valley. Yet the developer has not been asked how big the site needs to be to make these changes economic. And F, the likelihood of a reduced site being able to provide any affordable homes rather than estate-style homes throughout seems to be much diminished. Arbitrarily selecting certain sites that were previously deemed unsuitable and then suggesting modification to those sites without evidence as to whether those changes would even work, let alone fully mitigate the original concerns, risks opening the process to challenge from third parties. Promoters of other sites that were previously rejected will argue that their sites might also have been made acceptable had they been asked to scale down their proposals. Does Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council share WPHE's concern that following the inspector's uninformed and somewhat cavalier suggestions at sites such as Well 1, 2, 6 and 15 and Dig 1 would leave the site selection process open to challenge from other site promoters, thereby risking the local plan soundness and legality? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bolton to respond.
Thank you, Chairman. Officers have carried out the comparative assessment of sites called for by the inspector, and this is set out in the site selection addendum as Appendix A to this report. Since the publication of the report, the promoter of the site has contacted the council to advise that only 190 of the 218 dwellings identified on Well 1 and 2 would need to come forward to fund the bridge and road widening. Should these sites be selected for allocation, there will be a further round of consultation as main modifications. The council has taken legal advice throughout the preparation of the plan. It does not consider there is a risk of a successful legal challenge. Section 5 of the report on the local plan this evening sets out the legal implications of the submission of additional sites and main modification consultation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. We now move on to question number 4, which is from Mrs. Amanda Andrews. Brad.
Thank you, Chair. Given the government's recent express wish not to build future homes on Greenbelt sites, why are sites such as Dig 1 even being considered? Thank you.
Thank you. It's a fantastically worded and fantastically lengthy question. Councillor Bolton to respond.
Thank you. Members of Cabinet have sought clarification of government policy in this respect. The decision upon housing numbers and sites must be based on current government policy. This states that land should only be released on the green belt in exceptional circumstances. There are insufficient brownfield opportunities to meet the need for housing. Government policy does allow for green belt to constrain the extent to which housing need should be met in full. The inspector has concluded, however, that the harm can be mitigated and that there are sufficient sites to meet the full need for housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. We now move on to question number 5 from Mr. Alex Booker. Brad.
Thank you, Chair. Dig 1 has not been considered as an appropriate development site for the inclusion in the local plan previously. Promotions for 25 dwellings, 130 dwellings, and 130 to 180 dwellings have all been excluded from the previous versions of the plan. The 2016 HELAA study concluded that the site is not suitable for development due to the substantial impact that it would have on heritage assets in the vicinity of the site, namely on the setting of the registered HPG and the listed buildings within the park, and on the setting of the Welwyn Viaduct. Moreover, it raised substantial issues on deliverability and viability, particularly in regard to upgrades to wastewater infrastructure. At the Stage 9 hearings, the inspector suggested potential allocation of Dig 1 subject to access from New Road at the northern end. This is not legally possible, so the site remains undeliverable. Dig 1 is not sustainable with the lack of services and facilities, and nothing has changed from the previous council decision not to allocate Dig 1. Can the committee explain on what basis this site has now been allocated? Thank you.
Councillor Bolton to respond.
Thank you. The committee have yet to consider whether this site should be allocated. Dig 1 was previously not proposed for allocation because of the harm to the historic environment. However, evidence to the hearing concluded that the harm would not be substantial. A smaller development would help to mitigate and reduce the harm further. Whilst the inspector felt the sustainability of this site could be improved with the provision of a second access, He did not state in his report that its soundness was contingent on that. The site has been assessed on the basis of no secondary access. In any event, restrictive covenants can be overcome and do not necessarily prevent development coming forward. Digswell has a limited number of services and facilities which include a railway station, and it is identified in the submitted plan as a sustainable location for limited development where this is compatible with the scale and character of the village. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. We now move on to question number 6, which is from Mr. Colin Armitt. Brad.
Thank you, Chair. Does the committee agree that the restricted covenants preventing the construction of a footpath or road on properties such as mine, located on New Road, Digswell, preclude Dig 1 from being deliverable and therefore the site should not be allocated in the local plan? Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Councillor Bolton to respond.
Thank you. Although a pedestrian access onto New Road would improve the site's sustainability, the site has been assessed based on there not being secondary access, and it is therefore not dependent on one being provided. The council is aware that restrictive covenants have been placed on properties along New Road that relate to access. Notwithstanding the site is not dependent on a secondary access, restrictive covenants do not mean development cannot come forward, as there is a process that could, if successful, result in their removal. For these reasons, the restrictive covenants are not considered to preclude the delivery of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. The 7th and final question is from Mr. Howard Dawson. Brad to read.
Thank you, Chair. At the CPPP meetings on the 23rd and 29th of January 2020, members of this panel made clear that they required all sites of high harm to the Greenbelt and Simon's High to be deleted from the local plan on the grounds that exceptional circumstances did not exist to support those allocations. The evidence to support the deletion high harm sites is primarily contained in the Stage 3 Land Use Consultants LUC Greenbelt Review, which was commissioned at the express request of the inspector in 2017 after the local plan had been submitted. BRP4 forms part of a parcel which LUC found to be very high harm, essential to retain if it were released from the Greenbelt. LUC then irrationally found that the smaller area of BRP4 could be reduced to high harm if released from the Greenbelt, but it made that comment without undertaking any Greenbelt assessment of the BRP4 against national purposes. It clearly makes no sense for the LUC to state that the whole parcel is very high harm and essential to retain if it then promotes a piecemeal development of component parts within the parcel, such that the integrity of the whole parcel is not retained. In addition to Greenbelt harm, the public benefits associated with highway improvements as stated in policy SADM 31 and table 15 of the local plan have all now been removed by the council because the site promoter does not own the land required for the delivery of those promised highway improvements. That means that the council was misled by the promoter of BRP4 at the time of the original allocation in June 2016. The council should not tolerate that abuse. BRP4 also breaches the strong and permanent Greenbelt boundary on the East Coast Mainline Railway. This is in direct contravention of the NPPF and the government guidance not to breach a permanent Greenbelt boundary to be replaced by weak boundary. Paragraph 85 of the NPPF specifically states in respect to Greenbelt boundaries, define boundaries clearly using physical features that are readily recognisable and likely to be permanent. The East Coast Mainline Railway is clearly defined and likely to be permanent. It should not be breached with new development which falls into open countryside. The inspector offers no justification for the allocation of BRP4 beyond its location from a movement perspective. This is a weak and vague reason. BRP4 is no more sustainable than other more suitable sites in Brooklands Park, which are all within walking distance of the schools, shops, railway station and other facilities. In fact, BRP4 is further away from the primary school and secondary school than the alternative sites in Brooklands Park. Proximity to a railway station alone is not sufficient to overcome the test of exceptional circumstances when other sites in the same area are equally well located for public transport and are more suitable and sustainable, particularly when weighed in accordance with the sustainable objectives in the NPPF. The Council has formally notified the Inspector in writing that the BRP4 does not meet the legal test of exceptional circumstances for release from the Greenbelt. That test in paragraph 83 of the NPPF has been the subject of High Court judgments. Failure to meet the test of exceptional circumstances is fatal for BRP4. At the CPPP meeting on the 15th September 2021, Councillor Stephen Bolton stated in reference that the Inspector's advice concerning BRP4, it is a completely unacceptable statement by the Inspector that there is an option to increase capacity from 250 dwellings to 478 dwellings. Whilst I contended that BRP4 is wholly unsuitable for allocation at all, an increase in the scale of development on BRP4 above the 250 dwellings would be, as Councillor Bolton made it clear, is completely unacceptable. The test of exceptional circumstances is a legal test which has been defined by the High Court in the Culverton judgment. The Council cannot flip-flop its application of this legal test to suit its agenda. The consequence of any development on BRP4 would have the greatest detrimental impact on Welwyn Green and Water End. As a resident of Welwyn Green, I am entitled to expect the Council to act in the best interest for the whole community, not just a favoured few. Would the CPPP please confirm at its meeting on the 13th of January 2021, 1. The BRP4 does not meet the legal test of exceptional circumstances for allocation in the local plan. 2. New evidence from the LUC commissioned during the examination has established that the BRP4 is within a parcel that is very high harm in the Greenbelt and therefore essential to retain in the Greenbelt. And 3. BRP4 should be deleted from the submitted local plan and replaced by more suitable and sustainable sites within Brooklands Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad, and well done. I'll pass it on to Councillor Bolton for a response.
Thank you, Chairman. The Inspector has concluded that site HS22, which is BRP4, does meet the test for exceptional circumstances and that its allocation is sound. The LUC Greenbelt evidence indicated that the site lies within a high harm subparcel and is not an area identified as essential to retain as Greenbelt land. As the site was included in the local plan when it was submitted, it can only be deleted if required to make the plan sound. That is not the inspection's conclusion.
Thank you, Councillor Bolton. We now move on to agenda item number 7, local plan, additional sites and modifications to the plan. I'm now going to hand it over to Sue Tiley, who will be presenting her report.
Thank you, Chair. I do have a presentation to share with members. So I'll just load it on the screen. And hopefully you can all see the presentation. Excellent. Okay, so the purpose of the report is to consider the options for delivering a sound plan and how they perform. The report is accompanied by 4 appendices. Appendix A, which provides the transparent comparative assessment asked for the Inspector and updates the previous site selection assessment, taking on board the tests raised by the Inspector. Appendix B, which explores the 5-year land supply and the need for a stepped trajectory. Appendix C, which is the sustainability appraisal of the different distribution options. And Appendix D, which provides a list of all the sites considered by the Inspector and what option they fall within. As it's some time since I presented to to committee. I have also, in the slides, covered, have some background information on the local plan and also on the inspector's reports, because the last time I presented that information was back in September. Sorry, just got to be. So, key stages in the preparation of the plan. You will see from the slide that the preparation of the local plan commenced before 2009. The first major consultation was on issues and options in 2009, followed by a core strategy in 2012. And then following the introduction of the National Planning Policy Framework, we moved on to looking at allocation of sites, and there was sites consultation in 2015. And then finally, the proposed draft local plan was consulted on in 2016 before submitting that for examination in May 2017. So each of those stages involved consultation, but there was also consultation in between those formal events as well. As part of the examination process, because the inspector asked us to identify additional sites, there was further consultation in 2019 on additional sites, and then the council's proposed changes to the plan in 2020. Additional sites were then submitted to the examination in November 2020, but they were found to be unsound by the inspector for the reasons set out in his various reports. Should members agree to submit additional sites which are capable of making the plan sound, there would then be main modifications consultation, which would commence in February next month. And then we would receive a final report and hopefully adopt the plan in 2022. There have also been a number of hearing sessions. The examination has gone on since 2017, and it is one of the longest running, if not now the longest running local plan examination. It started in September 2017, when after the stage 2 hearing session, the inspector informed us that the plan was likely to be unsound, but that he felt it was capable of being made sound. Then in 2018, we had further sessions on Birchall Garden Suburb, topic-specific policies, Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City, and then the Greenbelt assessment. Then in 2019, we had sessions on Birchall Garden Suburb, and then again in 2020, Birchall Garden Suburb, Simon's Hyde, village sites in 2020.
Sorry, Sue, can I just pause you for a second? Pankit looks like he's
sorry, Chair. I think we just got a message from the member of public that they can't see any slides what Sue is presenting. So can we just make sure that the member of public can see the presentation?
Okay, thank you, Pankit. I'm gonna wait to see if we can test that.
Yeah, I can assure you they are being checked.
Chair, just to confirm that the public should be able to see the slides. They may need to click on slides rather than the agenda to see the picture, but they are being seen by the webcast.
Okay. Okay, fine. I think we should crack on. Planning Kid, if I'm not sure what the best thing to do is there an email that somebody can use if there's own issues?
As I said, Chair, they should be able to see the slides if they click on the slides option on the screen.
Slides option. Okay, great. Okay, well, let's carry on. AV, if there is anything that you have to report, please do feel free to interrupt. Sorry to spoil your flow, Sue. Do you want to carry on?
Yes, thank you. So just a reminder of what the content of the submitted plan is. It contains a spatial vision and objectives, spatial strategy for sustainable development, topic-specific policies, as well as settlement and site-specific policies. And there is much of the content of the local plan which has been found sound, particularly with regards to the topic-specific policies. But it is the settlement strategy and the site-specific policies which have been the most controversial. And just a reminder for members, the development strategy set out in the plan seeks to maximise opportunities for brownfield sites in towns and villages, but it does require the release of greenbelt land to help meet development needs through urban extensions and more limited growth in and around villages. And the starting point to the distribution was looking at a proportionate approach, taking into account the settlement hierarchy and the availability of sustainable sites. It also seeks to protect urban open land within the towns and villages and has proposed the development of a green corridor between Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield to link with various green spaces within those urban areas. It also seeks to secure the delivery of supporting infrastructure, transport services and facilities. So the inspectors' reports, they're dated June 2021, but I believe we actually received them in July 2021. And as I've said, I reported on these to this panel in September last year. So I don't propose to go into them in a lot of detail, but do just want to remind members of the inspector's report on the full objective assessment of housing need. And this is, we have a full objective assessment of housing need because we're being examined under the transitional arrangements, which relates to the 2012 version of the National Plan Policy Framework. If the plan was to be found unsound, we would revert to the standard methodology for calculating housing needs, and that currently would result in a figure of 875 dwellings per annum. So calculation of the OAN needs to follow government planning practice guidance and then is examined by the inspector. The starting point is the demographic and population projections, and then there is an uplift for market signals and affordability. And our inspector has imposed another uplift to address the fact that we have an imbalance in terms of commuting. In other words, we have more jobs than people of economically active working age. The OAN has been reviewed 3 times during the examination, and my understanding is there is no opportunity for further debate on this matter. The hearing sessions have closed. That's not just my opinion, we have taken advice on that. So something else I think members need to be reminded of is his supplementary report, where he provides guidance and advice to the council on how to get to a sound plan. He talks about the approach to site selection and the need to consider a range of factors, not just green harm, unless it is very high harm, and in that case he would accept that there should be no development. He talks about the need to produce a comparative, transparent assessment of all the sites that he has examined. And when considering the distribution, it is important to ensure that we have a 5-year land supply plus 20%, that if we are still proposing a step trajectory, we need to set out the justification for that. that the distribution needs to be proportionate and linked to the sustainability of settlements and sites. And he also considers that we need to increase numbers within the Welwyn parish area because he has noticed there are few allocations within the parish. And then not only do we need a proportionate distribution between settlements, but we should have a proportionate amount of housing throughout the plan period. So in other words, all the housing shouldn't come forward in the first 5 or 10 years, but we should ensure that there is housing coming forward in the last 5 years as well. So there are options. There is more capacity than required to meet the OAN. In deciding which sites to allocate, the council will need to follow his advice. And we need to ensure that local need is being met when we look at the distribution of growth amongst the settlements, but it's up to the council to define what we mean by local need. He has identified villages with stations as being particularly sustainable, and Welwyn Green as perhaps being the most sustainable of the villages because it has a station and a large employment area. Simonside could come forward, but only if sites in the most sustainable locations also come forward. And just a reminder for members, this is our last opportunity to get to a sound plan, and a lack of a sound plan does run the risk of planning by appeal. So the starting point. So we've been given an OAN of 15,200 dwellings for the period 2016 to 2036. So because it started in 2016, there have been a number of completions which can count towards that figure, as well as sites with planning permission. And then there is the windfall allowance and the small site allowance. And then after that, you have to add insufficient sites through your allocations. So after taking account of windfall, small sites, commitments and completions, the required to find figure is 10,198 dwellings. The inspector has examined sites put forward by the council, both in 2016 and later in 2020, and found that there are allocations totaling around 8,500 dwellings, which could be sound. And therefore, what we're looking for is an additional 1,641 dwellings, which need to be allocated from the remaining sites considered by the inspector. The inspector has also concluded that opportunities for further development in Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield have largely been exhausted, and there are no more opportunities. So I mentioned that one of the inspector's tests was 5-year land supply and ensuring that we have a proportionate amount of housing across the entire plan period. So there are a number of ways that you can calculate the 5-year land supply. The most usual one is the the Sedgefield approach. And this requires you to take account of any shortfall within the first 5 years. So not only do you have to ensure you've got a 5-year land supply of 3,800 dwellings, but any shortfall in the period between 2016 and 2021 also should be accommodated in the first 5 years. And then on top of that, because we currently have a poor track record of supply, we have to add another 20%. So if you're using the Sedgefield approach, that gives you a figure of 5,846 dwellings. So Appendix B to the report has examined opportunities for a 5-year land supply and set out whether we still need to have a stepped target. And it is demonstrated from all the sites that the inspector has identified that it is impossible to reach a figure of 5,846 dwellings within the first 5 years. It's also looked at the Liverpool approach, and that is possible to deliver that. But what you can't do is deliver over 3,000 dwellings at the back end of the plan period. So we have identified an alternative approach, similar to one accepted by the East Herts planning inspector into their local plan examination, and identified that we could make up the shortfall within the first 10 years of the plan period, and then that would give us a lower target for the last 5 years. And we think that should meet the inspector's requirements, because it does mean the shortfall is made up more quickly. So, as I said, it's the alternative approach that we've used to benchmark, to test all the different distribution options to ensure that they meet that test required by the inspector. So then we also need to set about identifying local need and how we will assess the proportionate distribution. So the inspector, during the examination, asked us to provide some evidence around what would be a proportionate distribution of natural growth figures, and that's one of the examination documents that's in the on the website EX265. And that gives you a minimum figure, but you will never meet the OAN if that is all you're looking to deliver. And there is considerable pressure for inward migration. That is why our housing numbers are as high as they are. So then we looked at providing an upper end with the natural growth figure being the lower end. We looked at identifying a higher end, and that being a proportion of the OAN in line with the size of the individual settlement. In deciding how to distribute sites, we need to give more weight to the more sustainable settlements. So you would expect the settlements in tiers 1, 2, and 3 to have allocations closer to the proportionate distribution or slightly over, whereas tier 4, 5, and 6, you would expect to be closer to the local need figure. So we developed 2 initial options, mindful of the fact that members had voted to remove Simonside from the local plan. That was one of the distribution options that we first looked at. And it quickly became clear that in order to exclude Simonside from the plan, every other single site that the inspector had examined would need to come forward if we're to meet the full objective assessment of housing need. The other option that we tested was a more proportionate approach based on the local needs test, reflecting settlement hierarchy, increasing dwelling numbers in Welwyn Parish, and then including Simonside to make up the difference. And this is the initial analysis when tested against the requirement to have a 5-year housing land supply, and also the requirement to have proportionate spread throughout the plan periods. And you can see that option A didn't perform particularly well in terms of 5-year land supply, didn't even meet the alternative approach target for the first 5 years, but was better at the back end of the plan period, whereas option B performed well for the first 5 years, but not at all well for the last 5 years. And also, when you looked at the sites that were included, this included sites which the inspector had indicated were unlikely to be sound, if not justified by local need, and resulted in disproportionate growth of some settlements. For example, Stanborough, which is the lowest tier of our hierarchy, would have to double in size. So we felt it was important to develop some more options, and we developed 2 further options, C and D. Option C being a variant of option B, but with additional growth in the last 5 years. And then looking at the nature and size of sites, found it difficult to find sites which would deliver at the end of the plan period, and therefore introduced Simonside for the last 5 years, with the remainder of the site coming forward beyond the plan period. So we introduced 500 dwellings. In option D, that was a variation of option A, with additional proportionate growth in the more sustainable villages, but with the full amount of Simonside coming forward. But the initial assessment resulted actually in delivering more than the 15,200 dwellings. So as you can see, this is how they performed, and you can see that option D actually resulted in 15,606 dwellings. So that has presented the opportunity to refine some of the capacity assessments for some of the sites, and I will come on to that later. So this is all the options for every single settlement, and then assessed against the local needs target, which, as you can see, is a range. So Welwyn Garden City. So as I said earlier, no additional sites added for Welwyn Garden City. So the dwellings are exactly the same for options C and D, as well as A and B. But because option D actually resulted in more dwellings than is needed for the target, it does present an opportunity to perhaps reduce capacity assessments for the Broadwater Road West site, which I know is proving controversial at the moment. An additional 600 dwellings were added in November 2020 by members, over and above what had received planning permission. So there is the potential perhaps to reduce that uplift by 400 dwellings. And it should be noted for the purposes of calculation that site HS1 Land at Berwick Way has already completed. So sometimes the numbers differ. So Hatfield, as I've said, no additional sites. These have all been found sound. So then if we go to look at the northern villages, and I'll just expand a bit so that you can see more clearly the sites that we're talking about. So if we start with Walmer Green, Walmer Green 1, this site here has been found sound. Walmer Green is a tier 4 settlement, and the dwelling requirement does actually meet the proportionate approach, but the inspector has identified in his report that the urban site WE100 would actually assist in mitigating the harm to the greenbelt by providing an alternative access to Walmer Green 1. And it's also an urban site rather than greenbelt site. And so we've included that in the option for both option C and D. There is another site within the Walmer Green area, Walmer Green 3 here, which is actually an extension of Nebworth that would be required in the without Simonside option. It's only moderate harm to the greenbelt, but principally because we've already met the proportionate approach for Walmer Green, and because it is a tier 4 settlement, option C and D remain with just those 2 sites. So moving on to Oaklands and Mardley Heath. So OMH6 was not initially proposed for allocation and has not been found suitable for allocation, but OMH9 was considered to be suitable, although not originally proposed for allocation because it breached quite a strong greenbelt boundary. the inspector has suggested that this could come forward. The capacity that we've identified has been increased from 12 to 25 on the basis of more recent evidence. But although theoretically you could access OMH6 via OMH9, you wouldn't actually increase the dwelling numbers. So there is no benefit in allocating that site as well. So moving through to Welwyn. So in the option D proposals, no additional sites have been added. In the option C proposals, the sites in Singler's Marsh are proposed for allocation. Dig 1 and Digswell. So this is a site which was originally found unsuitable, but as the responses to the questions we've heard today, the evidence to the hearing concluded that the harm wouldn't be substantial, and officers have received further evidence, including a heritage impact assessment, which indicates that if development were reduced to 80 dwellings, that you could protect views of Welwyn Viaduct and also provide some mitigation to the registered park and garden if supported by additional planting. So option D proposes 80 dwellings, whereas option C actually proposes a higher number. I just trying to find the sorry, I think that's it. Right, so this is option C. So you can see the additional sites in the Welwyn area proposed to be included in option C, which are essentially the Singler's Marsh sites referred to in the questions we heard earlier. So moving further south to Stanborough, sorry, let's go back one. So moving further south, you can see STL 13, that's a site in Lemsford, which is included in option C, but isn't included in option D. It's a small settlement currently washed over by the Greenbelt, so it would have to change its place in the hierarchy. And then Simonside Hat 15, as I mentioned earlier, a small amount of development is included in option C for 500 dwellings, with the remainder coming forward in the next plan period, whereas option D includes the full quantum for Simonside. So then moving on to the southern villages. So I will try expanding again. So if we start with Welwyn Green. So when we looked at options for Welwyn Green, we concluded that we needed to consider Welwyn Green and Brookmans Park together, because levels of growth are likely to require a new primary school, and there is a relationship between the two settlements in terms of primary school provision. So the Welwyn Green option C option proposes a new primary school to be situated within site WEG 15. WEG 15 is a site that the inspector felt only part should come forward. It wasn't a site he was particularly keen on because of potential impact on the Greenbelt. But if it did come forward, only part of it, so the size has been reduced, dwelling numbers have been reduced, and also a primary school, it's suggested, could be provided if option C is the preferred option. In terms of Brookmans Park, then you would have BRP4 plus BRP4A coming forward for the full amount of development of 478 dwellings, and BRP 12 coming forward. If one then moves to look at, right, let's just try the option D proposals. This is one where the primary school provision would be in Brookman's Park, and therefore capacity at BRP4 and BRP4A would be reduced to 428 dwellings. And then WEG 15 would not be included in the Welham Green site options. So pros and cons of options C and D. On balance, officers have recommended option D because they feel it's better aligned to the vision and objectives set out in the local plan. It meets the local needs test. It's based on a proportionate distribution weighted to the more sustainable settlements. It results in a more balanced delivery with more sites at the end of the plan period. And also it means we wouldn't need to alter the strategy for gypsy and traveller provision. Option C, however, does have merits. The sites selected based on the inspector's comments on sustainability and the need to increase numbers in Welwyn Parish. It does, however, result in disproportionate growth for some settlements, and it would require us to revisit the distribution of gypsy and traveller pitches. It does, however, provide for more sites in the first 5 years of the plan period. So risks. Inspector has made it clear we need more sites to meet the full objective assessment of housing need. And sites need to be selected taking into account his tests if the plan is to be found sound. As I've previously said, there isn't an opportunity to submit a lower number and no opportunity to negotiate. Current plan is out of date and has limited weight in decision making. We are starting to lose appeal decisions because of a lack of a 5-year housing land supply and the housing delivery test. The conclusion of our analysis is that we will still require a step trajectory, no matter which of the options you go for. In both cases, the first 5 years, the target would have to be reduced to 610 and then built up in the middle part of the plan period and then reduced again for the latter part of the plan period. If we were to have no up-to-date plan, it's likely to result in ad hoc development with impact on the level of developer contributions because we'd have no knowledge of where sites are likely to come forward, and therefore you couldn't make rational decisions about planning for new infrastructure. And then just moving forward, we do have a very tight timetable. The timetable is that the recommendations from this panel will be considered by Cabinet on the 18th of January, with full council making a final decision on the 27th of January. Main modifications consultation, should the inspector consider the plan is capable of being made sound, would start as soon after full council as possible, and the agreed date with the inspector is the 4th of February. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue, and thank you to all of the officers involved in what has been a very challenging few years trying to get us to this point. Before we move into questions, I think it's important for me to remind the panel that we are elected members who clearly must listen to our communities. And from consultations throughout this process, they have consistently raised our residents, their concerns, which I hope we'll be properly addressing tonight. Sue, I have a few questions for you before I open it up to the other panel members. The first is in relation to Simon's side. Can I ask you, I know you mentioned it in your presentation, but can you also state here for clarity the position of the inspector around the development within the area in relation to the numbers that we may choose to look at in the villages?
Yes, so what he has said is that we don't have to select Simonside, but that if we do, we must make sure that we select those sites which are more sustainable than Simonside. But during his examination of the sites, he's realised that there are some sites which aren't particularly sustainable. And unlike Simonside, they don't have the critical mass to fund any improvements in public transport infrastructure. So that's one of the reasons why he has accepted Simonside, although initially being quite reluctant to do so. In terms of the numbers, not all of it needs to come forward during the plan period, but if we allocate Simonside, then it has to be for the full 1,500 dwellings, because that is the size he thinks that is required to make the development sustainable.
Thank you. And I know you've just mentioned the infrastructure requirements. Could you tell us a bit more about how you've considered the infrastructure requirements for a place like Simonside, if it was to be put into the local plan? Okay, so one of the things we looked at is what sort of critical mass do you need to ensure that you get primary school. What sort of critical mass do you need to ensure that shops would be viable, and what sort of critical mass do you need to ensure you need to encourage public transport provision. I think Simonside, because it is close to Northwest Hatfield and is in the same ownership, there are benefits in terms of public transport provision, because the promoter of the site will work to ensure that there is a relationship between the two sites, and that a bus network linking Simonside with Northwest Hatfield can be delivered. The inspector did ask for further evidence on this more than once, and that was submitted to the examination. Bus operators have stated their interest. The County Council considers it is a viable proposition, I think principally because of the relationship of Simonside with Northwest Hatfield. And the inspector did also scrutinise the viability of providing public transport infrastructure as well, and eventually was satisfied by the evidence. Thank you. I will save my other questions perhaps for later. So panel members, if you would like to ask a question or make a comment, can you please raise your electronic hand? The first hand we have is Councillor Thusu. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Thank you. Just wanted to start off with thanking Sue, the officers, the planning department on, again, tremendous amount of work that you've put in. And I'm not saying this, I remember 2 years ago, the amount of work you put in then. And I thought it was back from when I started in 2018, but it seems that we can go back to 2009 when we have come to this point. So I'd like to thank you for all your hard work, especially also with how you seem to be very much held to ransom by the inspector. And I hope that the inspector is listening to this, because he didn't seem to do a lot of listening in the numerous listening events that were held for this local plan over many years. And I hope him delaying his retirement was worth it, for him to listen to what I have to say going forward. I could talk for a long time with over 100 emails from members of the public, not just from Welwyn West, which obviously was heavily featured in the questions, not just from Welwyn East, Welwyn Green, Simonside, Brookmans Park, Cuffley, Hatfield Villages, Hatfield South, parish members. So many objections to all that has been put through because the inspector refused our original 13277. And essentially, a lot of it comes down to the fact that we are being obliged more or less told to go build on the green belt. I'm sure some of you were in this CPPP come 2 years ago. I remember we were not in a majority administration then. We came to a group decision to give 13,277, and that was still quite high for a number of councillors, including the opposition. And I thought the inspector would take that on board. Also, other areas, other boroughs did not give their inspector the full number they wanted, but the inspector in those cases did reduce what he wanted, and it feels ours has basically asked us for even more. And that lines me back to the question that I have to struggle with. How can I possibly say, let's build D because the inspector wants this, when I have so many people, the people who don't vote for me, against it? Because then we would have to take the can. And forever and a day, I would have to hear from other opposition councillors, it's a conservative plan. It's not a conservative plan, it's an inspector that's put us in a difficult position. We could be very disingenuous and put everything in an opposition ward and just put it all in Simon's side and say, yeah, we've done that case. But we shouldn't do that. We should actually stand up for Welwyn Hatfield. Now, I'm sure if I received well over 100 emails, you've all received the same number of emails. And it is difficult. You know, we can debate whether, you know, we have to think for the betterment of, you know, not just our area, but the whole thing. But let's face it, this isn't going to make things better. You know, if this was, I wonder if this was an open forum rather than a virtual, we would have even more people than for the biopark wanting to speak about this. It has really, really put the cat among the pigeons here. So I'm not going to do my usual appeal to my sort of populist nature. I'm going to directly make a few points about the report. Number one, we know that businesses, and you know, if you read the Welwyn Hatfield Times the last couple of days, are not really, retail operations are going down here. So the question about, you know, people commuting in and requiring the housing, you know, that argument, I'm afraid, doesn't sit. The council needs to own this and to choose their own housing needs and set against recent government guidelines. That's another thing as well. Unfortunately, we have had changes of what we're supposed to do. Recent guidelines said that we don't need to be building on the green belt. Now, we have written to the minister and he has reiterated that, and I've seen that letter. And lastly, the growth. Well, in the last 10 years, the UK population has increased 8.5%, but actually it's mostly stagnant, really. We're not having that much growth that we request all this new housing, the extra nearly 2,000 that the inspector wants us to put in. And I will say this, yes, I'm not a councillor for more urban areas of Welwyn Garden City and Hatfield. I do come from a green belt heavy area, but the green belt benefits everybody. Everybody during the pandemic went out when they were allowed to enjoy the green belt. We are now saying we're going to take that green belt away. So I'm sure we're going to have a lot of debate going forward, and there's going to be some sort of, well, if we take this in, can we have option E, option F? But I would like you all to consider this. I asked the panel to consider rejecting the recommendations reluctantly, A to D, okay? I recommend that we stand up and say that 2 years ago, when we all worked together, not perfectly, we said 13,277 is what we can deliver. And we can probably say that to our electorate, based basically on the fact that we got to that position, not through, you know, pushing it through, but to discussing it and taking things out and getting an agreement. I would like you all to consider that. And that would be, if possible, my motion. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, before I give it to Sue to respond, if just to be clear, Councillor, are you saying that you are offering up an alternative recommendation?
Yes, I am actually. I'm offering up that we reject, reluctantly, I'm sorry, officers and Sue, but reject plans A to D, and we go back, we recommend to the Cabinet that we stick our ground at 13,277, as was agreed in 2022. And I'm sure we'll discuss about the risks and benefits of that, and that's fine. That's what we're here to do. But that is my motion that I would like to put forward and to be discussed.
Okay, so well, we'll see how the rest of the discussion carries on, and we'll set that aside for now. But Chris, I think, are you going to respond, or Sue, or will you both double hat?
Chair, I think I'd like to just make some comments about that proposal, and I would draw members' attention to section 7 of the officer's report on page 14 of the agenda. The inspector has found an overall figure of 15,200 new homes to be sound, and has made it clear that unless the council adds in more sites to the local plan to achieve the full objectively assessed housing need, the plan will be found unsound. Should the inspector find the plan unsound, for example, because it does not make provision for what he regards as the appropriate level of housing development, and or because he doesn't regard the sites put forward to meet the new housing to be appropriate, the council would be unable to adopt the plan. And in this eventuality, the council wouldn't have an up-to-date plan, as the current adopted district plan dates from 2005 and is therefore largely out of date, particularly in relation to policies relating to new residential development. So if the emerging plan is withdrawn or found unsound, the council would have to largely rely on policies in the NPPF for decision making. Because the council no longer has a 5-year land supply and has also failed the housing delivery test, the presumption in favour of sustainable development already applies. So in the absence of an up-to-date local plan, policies seeking to protect areas from residential development would carry less weight, and the council is more likely to lose decisions on appeal. There's therefore the risk that in the absence of an up-to-date local plan, the council's vulnerability to opportunistic speculative planning applications and associated appeals would increase significantly. It also needs to be noted that by virtue of its date of submission for examination, the emerging plan is being judged against a version of the NPPF which was published in 2012 rather than against more recent versions. The housing requirement is therefore lower than it would be under more recent government policy. If the emerging plan is not adopted, the housing figure of 760 per annum would effectively be replaced by a higher figure of 875 per annum generated by the standard methodology. Ultimately, tonight's decision on the recommendation to be made to Cabinet is one for the panel to make, but officers are duty bound to alert members to the very real risks associated with departing from the principles set out by the planning inspector in his letter dated June 2021.
Thank you, Chris. It was very, very clear. Sue or Chris, do you want to respond to any of the other substantive points made by Councillor Dusu? I
don't think, unless Sue had any further comments, Chair, I don't think I had anything really further to say on that.
Okay.
The only comment would be around the approach to the green belt, and I'm aware of the Prime Minister's recent statements, and I've also seen the correspondence from the Minister for Housing. So the local plan has to be prepared against current policy. Current policy does allow for the release of land from the greenbelt in exceptional circumstances. There is very little guidance, government guidance, about what that means, and therefore it is down to the inspector to interpret that as informed by legal decisions such as the Calverton test. The inspector has considered this. He considers there are exceptional circumstances to release land from the greenbelt because of the high need for housing, but also because he's looked at the merits of various sites, and he considers the harm to greenbelt can be mitigated, and also that development could come forward without needing to lose any very high harm land. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Councillor Dusu, do you want to come back?
Yes, thank you for that. Chris, thank you. Sue, thank you. Look, I appreciate this is very difficult and you have told us of the risk. I note that the slightly lower figure that we came in November 2020 already had quite a bit of building in the Greenbelt anyway. So it wasn't as if I'm saying nothing in the Greenbelt. Look, I understand that we are going to be given advice, and we have been given advice by the QC, but ultimately this is the problem. I can listen to, this is what's going to happen. But let's say, for example, we go ahead with 15.2, sorry. We're going to have DMC meetings after DMC meetings with people objecting, and it's going to appeal anyway. I can guarantee you that. The amount of feeling that has gone into the already 13.277 and now the 15.200 will mean that every application, whether it be Digswell, whether it be Welwyn Green, whether it be Simonside, will have people coming together, and the DMC, just as like the Biopark and others, will probably say, actually, we agree with you, because we do agree with it. I'd like to hear, obviously I'm going to hear what the other councillors hear, but are you really going to say that actually we want more development? Yes, we want more housing. So I think that the question of we're going to have this tsunami of planning and development by appeal, it would happen anyway, even if we did get the 15.200. I would feel, and this is again a recommendation to Cabinet to be discussed at full council. I cannot look at residents in the face that not just I represent, that I don't represent, to something I truly don't believe in. We already have a very low opinion of our elected individuals who, say, okay, I'll just say the government line and crack on with it. Unfortunately, this inspector has left us with no choice. It would be quite interesting if he would like to hold a one-to-one with every single resident that opposed, and in his opinion that the Greenbelt weren't, his opinion this and his opinion that. Other officers, other inspectors have been much more accommodating. We can revisit the local plan when we get a new inspector, perhaps, and he can enjoy his retirement in whichever sunny hillside he lives in. So I appreciate, Chris, Sue, this is probably going to give you a huge headache, my new proposal, but I'm afraid I have to stand by it. I think we are building in the Greenbelt as it is anyway. More is not going to make anyone happy at all.
Thank you, Councillor Tusu. And for those who are watching, I know Councillor Tusu used the acronym DMC a number of times. That stands for Development Management Committee, and that is where individual planning decisions are made. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Councillor Michaelides. You okay? There you go.
Thank you, Chairman. I have read the report and listened to Chris and Sue's explanations, but unfortunately, I have not been convinced that the building target of over 15,000 houses in our borough is the appropriate number. Firstly, and most importantly for me and many residents, is that what is being proposed does not account for the harm to the Greenbelt. A lot of, as Sunny said, a lot of Greenbelt has been released as it is, and I don't think any more than that would be acceptable. Secondly, I believe that the full objective assessed housing need is based on outdated assumptions. In a Financial Times article today, the Office of National Statistics predicts that the population growth will be slowing down by 2025 due to the lower births and the increased deaths. Add to this a predicted decline in business activity in our borough, and the need for housing will decrease even further. Third, I'm surprised that in my ward of Northern Cuffley, CAF 12 and CAF 7 are included without considering the parish council's warnings that developments in neighbouring boroughs, coupled with the disproportionate development proposed in the village, will lead to substantial strain on the railings, the local schools, health provision, and the already congested roads. As elected representatives, we have a duty to listen to the residents' concerns, convey them to the officers and the inspector, and expect them to take them into account when formulating the plan. For these reasons, I am not willing to support the proposed options, but would vote for Sunny's proposal of the 13,277 houses as agreed by the CPPP last year. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Michaelides. Councillor Steve McNamara.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to add my thanks to the officers for an excellent piece of work, adding and subtracting and rearranging the component parts of what is a very difficult puzzle in order to produce at least the least distasteful result that they are able to come up with. It's an extremely high target set by no one who is here tonight, or indeed anywhere near us tonight. I believe that many of the metrics used to calculate the target figure of 15,200 new homes are no longer as certain as perhaps they once were. There is every chance that our population growth will not be as high as forecast. Inward migration has already dropped following Brexit. Neither would I wish to see our towns and villages becoming dormitories for commuters drawn to the area by a housing surplus built on our greenbelt. A greenbelt introduced over 65 years ago to prevent urban sprawl. I've received well over 100 emails from residents passionately defending the greenbelt. If I were in two minds on the matter, I would advance their views as their elected representative. In this case, I'm already certain that sacrificing acre upon acre of our greenbelt, perhaps unnecessarily, given changing circumstances, greenbelt that can never be replaced, is a step too far. I will not support the CPPP recommending Annex D, options A to D of the report to Cabinet and full Council. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor McNamara. We'll now go to Councillor Jane Quinton.
It's an unexpected proposal from Councillor Thuso, I must say. I do agree that I don't want Simon's Hyde in the local plan. I do want to reduce the numbers proposed on Broadwater Road, but I am very concerned by this proposal. We have already had set out by the planners the reasons why we have to have a local plan. And if we now reduce the numbers, it's virtually certain, I think, from the music from the inspector, that the plan will just be thrown out. Now, for many, many years, the Conservatives have said this is the last thing we want, that we do not want planning by appeal. And I think that's what's going to happen. So I am very concerned by the proposal. Even though we are between a rock and a hard place, deciding where to build houses, I do acknowledge that. I think we are in even more danger of having planning by appeal. I think I need to hear from more people on their opinions, because I don't think this is a particularly sensible approach.
Thank you, Councillor Quinton. Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. Well, where to start? The inspector does have us over a barrel in some sense, in some ways, in quite a lot of ways actually. If members have read from section 5 down to the end of the actual papers, not the end of the whole report, just the end of the beginning papers, you'll see the legal, financial and risk management implications. And it spells out quite clearly there that the inspector is the one that does exactly what he does. So in that sense, I definitely agree with Sonny, Councillor Thusi. It does state in there that only the inspector can put in or take out any sites that are there. That's spelled out in black and white. It doesn't matter what we put in, the inspector has the last say. As we found out before, when we took Simonside out, the inspector suddenly said, you can't do that. You don't have the power to do that. So we were left in a position where we didn't really know what we could and couldn't do back then. But now we have much more of a say on it. However, this plan it actually is a Conservative plan. It was put in 2017 with a Conservative majority. And what we're trying to do, and what we've tried to do since then, is polish the edges to make it sound according to the inspector. Okay, that's essentially what's happened. We've started off with a bad plan to start with, and we're trying to get it past an inspector because we didn't distribute. The Conservatives didn't distribute the houses throughout the borough back then. It wasn't. And if you look at it, the whole plan started back in 2009 with two blocks, one at Welwyn Garden City and one at Hatfield. And that was the essential starting point for this local plan. And that's the reason where we've got to where we are. It really is. It's a local plan for no one local, and it's been bogged down with delays and huge financial cost. If we decided to go the route we're going with the inspector we've currently got, he's not as lenient as others. And it brings me back to something that was mentioned in the briefing by Sue Tiley just before. And that's our 5-year land supply. And we're going to take an alternative approach, which was agreed by the Hertford inspector. But the Hertford inspector has also been more lenient on OANs, whereas ours hasn't. So how do we know that our inspector would accept the alternative approach should we put one of them options in? Because we don't. He could very well turn around and say, actually, I don't accept that. You need to go back to the Sedgefield approach or whatever. Okay, so we essentially are being held hostage. I'll agree with Sonny there. We are being held hostage by an inspector. He is the only person that knows what he wants. Every time he throws something back to us, he doesn't say, if you do this, it's more, well, come back to me with something and I'll tell you if you've done it right. That's no way to run planning. And that's no way to run planning at all. We all get, if we put Simonside back in the plan, there will be, I've been told that they'll take it as far as they can to judicial review if they have to. Okay, because there's no way that blight should be on the landscape. How Hatfield House, incidentally, they're the ones that are going to develop it. This would be the reason why. They don't allow anything to overlook Hatfield House. Yet their development, that big blight on the landscape that Simonside will be, overlooks it all. Overlooks Welwyn Garden City and overlooks Hatfield as well. And they're quite happy for that to overlook Hatfield House because they're the ones that are going to be building it. And when it comes to transport and sustainability and buses, just incredibly, just can't believe what is going on in the world of people that think just by putting more houses there, it will make it sustainable. If you look at Essendon, that's an off the beaten track village, serviced by buses once every 2 hours. Simonside is going to be an off the beaten track village. It doesn't go anywhere. There's no reason for buses to go up there. It will be serviced at the end of a line somewhere where a bus will run round and come back. It will be a once every couple of hours bus service. It won't be anything more than that. The only sustainability, the people that live there, that buy them houses, that are going to be at least £500,000, the people that would live there would have electric cars or just normal cars and drive everywhere because they can afford to do that. They live in a village. They're not going to wait 2 hours for a bus to go and get their shopping. They're just going to jump in their car and go and get it. It completely baffles me why we are in the state that we're at. I'll reserve my right to speak on some other points and let other people come back in, because I have a few more points that I'll bring up a little bit later, depending on where this conversation goes. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Hayes, I'm very keen to make sure that all councillors have a chance to speak. So I'm going to go to Councillor Shah before I go to Councillor Tusu.
Thank you, Chair. I hear what Councillor Tusu said. I mean, obviously, I don't think so. Anyone in this committee who doesn't like to have a lower number, especially for Welwyn Hatfield. I think, to me, that point has been passed. I think, we already have to move forward. So I don't think so. We should be going back. I think Chris clearly said that we just have to work on the 15,200 numbers. I think Inspector has made it quite clear that if we have to work, we need to work on that number. I mean, obviously, we all are concerned in terms of Simon's Hyde, because we all agreed in January 2020 that, we want to move out. We need to get rid of Simon's House completely from the equation. And now we can see the Simon's Hydes coming back into the equation. So I thought the meeting is more about going on the option A, B, C, D, and how we can come up with option E or F without the Simon's Hyde. So I don't know why suddenly, we're just going back to 13,277, which is, I think the plan will be thrown out straight away. We will be just wasting last 10 years, £8 million just will be wasted just because we can't do. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. And just a point of clarification on something that was said by Councillor Hayes. I know that we've all worked quite well together as a panel, to my mind. But you mentioned that this plan is a Conservative plan. But I think it's important just to be clear about some numerical facts. So, 2017, we started at a base of 12,000 homes, which of course was found unsound. And the last plan, which was agreed, voted through 2 years ago, was for 13,277. So the 15,000 figure has never been a Conservative figure, or one that has expressively been supported by any Conservatives, as far as I'm aware. Councillor Rahal.
Thank you very much, Samuel, and good evening, everyone. We're here once again trying to establish how to increase the outrageous numbers of the new dwellings and busy pleasing everyone except our local residents who we represent. But before you start accusing, may I remind you that Liberal Democrats were never in denial for the need of the housing, but our concerns about the lack of community facilities in place and use of Greenbelt was in and will always be there. And we stand our grounds till this very day. However, I cannot stress enough to everyone sitting around here tonight to look at the danger of making a decision based on a political gain, then to actually put together an idea to fulfill the housing need and protecting Welwyn Garden City heritage, keeping Welwyn Hatfield residents' livelihood in mind as well. Because once this entire plan is executed, there will be no turning back, affecting thousands of local residents along with their livelihood and leaving generations to come to curse us all. Bear that in mind, please. May I also remind you that when NPPF was introduced in 2011, Grant Shapps was the housing minister. He was therefore the minister in charge when the current system was put in place. He had previously run a campaign against housing in Welwyn Hatfield called No Way 10K against a housing target of 10,000 proposed by the Regional Assembly and alongside the NPPF, meant each and every district had instead to come up with a plan based on the NPPF and the Conservative government's regulations on housing numbers. A divide and conquer tactic that has been very successful, albeit in recent years it has started to falter. This entire disaster plan is none other than the present Tory government's manipulating local councils to add more and more numbers of dwelling, further making a nightmare into reality for local people by Tory administration, carrying out the execution of this. If this wasn't enough, they want us to be part of this madness and accept us to choose from the unsustainable options to which I will pleasurably reject and disagree in every possible way. Our leading Tory party have been pulling the strings. They radically changed the officers' plans at a previous CPP meeting without giving any options councillors to opposition councillors any notice of what they were proposing. So we had to vote blind. That was an outrageous abuse of process. They have consistently tried to twist the proposals for political advantage, causing delays and adding to inspectors' annoyance. How can the Tories say that they are saving Greenbelt when they support development at Simonside and addition to Broadwater? So here we are, back again to square one. So I really want to know how far this will be and how many times will it keep coming back on the same thing. Are we here to represent people who have elected us or pleasing the other people? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rahal. Again, very happy for people to be very clear about views on national politics and national policy. But when we're talking about local members, I would encourage the panel to be as factually correct as possible. Again, as far as I'm aware, I do not know of any Conservative members who have advocated for developments within Simonside. Councillor Drew, has he disappeared? Where's he gone? Drew Richardson, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you. I did put my hand up and then I retracted it, but I'll just say a few bits. I think that this is a very, very tough, hard decision to make at this meeting. I have to actually back Councillor Thusu on this. And the reason for this is because I think it's a risk that we need to take. We were all elected, and certainly myself in Hatfield Villages, we're all elected to represent those residents. I have had so many complaints, concerns, phone calls, emails. And I think every resident watching, every resident out there in my patch, in Hatfield, in Wellingarn, in the whole of the borough, will be pushing against this number. I think this number is absurd. Don't get me wrong. I know we should be building. I know we need that land supply to carry on. But the issue is that 15,000 number is too high. So I'm going to have to agree with Councillor Thusu, and I think we should be pushing back because this is a local plan. This is for local councillors to decide. This shouldn't be an inspector's decision. This should be us deciding this. And this is for local residents who live here and want our borough to be as successful as it can be. And I think 15 is far too much.
Thank you, Councillor Richards. Councillor Thusu, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that I've spoken once again, but there was some points that were made in response to Councillor Glenn Hayes. If you think Simonside are going to push this all the way to the nth degree, I can guarantee you I can name 6 other sites that will push it to the nth degree. So again, as I say, you push through option D, you're still going to have a lot of planning by a committee. Listening to other members, it was almost I heard the voice of Councillor Zalewski, actually. It was quite interesting. What I would say is this. I'm not quite sure where some members stand on this. I've had a sort of, this is a Tory plan, this is that. Do you want 15,200 or do you want 13,277? It's as simple as that. If you want 15,200 and you want to call it a Tory plan, yeah, you can do that. Or you can say you actually agree and you think the less number is there. Taking a risk is what we're elected to do. If you want to play it safe, fine, vote for D, then there won't be any problems at all. But you have to actually state here what you want. Do you want to go with the inspector, what he has told you to do, and this idea that it's a Conservative plan, the government tells the inspector and the inspector tells us what to do. I think we've already heard from Councillor Hayes that other inspectors have learnt. And if that was really true, we could probably have said, oh, okay, fine, if the government wants us to do it, we'll do it. But we're pushing back, actually. This administration, this Conservative administration is pushing back against the government. Seems to be quite a popular thing these days anyway. So again, it'd be nice to hear, apart from the, the usual talk bashing, what do you want? You have 2 options. You can go with 15,200 or you can go with 13277, or just abstain and just let everyone else make the correct decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tusu. Councillor McNamara.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to sort of put some figures on the Simonside issue. And I live in a place that would overlook Simonside, so it's not in my interest to see it there. But it seems to be the holy grail for saying all we want to do is get rid of Simonside and we can just sign up to the rest of it. Well, that's great, unless you live in Welling, where leaving out Simonside means an extra 250 dwellings. Or Digswell will it mean an extra 36. Lemsford, an extra 27. Stanborough, 98. Welham Green, an extra 100 dwellings. Brookman's Park, an extra 280 dwellings. Little Heath, another 100 dwellings. And Cuffley, another 175 dwellings. So the pain isn't just centred on Simonside, it's pretty much equally spread around any green areas around the county.
Thank you, Councillor McNamara. Okay, I see Councillor Hayes. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just to come back to Councillor McNamara, the original plan that was put forward has always been built around Hatfield and Welwyn Garden City. All right, the villages were never fully expanded, and that's where we are now. That's why the inspector is saying that we need a better spread across the whole of the borough, which is something that the Labour group's been calling for from the very beginning. That's why we are where we are. Simonside came up late, extremely late in 2016. Hardly had as much didn't really have as much consultation as what everybody else had. They were thrown in at the deep end, and that got included in the plan. That's where Simonside came from. We've been doing this for a long time, and it pains me to say that the plan we had put in originally, the reason we're in this mess right now is because the plan we put in originally was wrong from the start. And now we're stuck, but we can only titivate with it. We can't make major changes to it because the inspector won't allow it. But the original plan put in is our starting point, shall we say, and we can't now do anything around it. Having thought about it, having listened to all the points that are going around, the plan that we put in 2019, we didn't vote for that plan either. We abstained from that one. However, looking at the difference between wanting 15,200 minimum and going back to the smaller number, on reflection, we'll stand with Sunny and we'll go for the smaller number. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayes. I'm going to go to Councillor Stanbury because he hasn't spoken yet. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you. Since my election last May, it's been clear to me that local people must control the planning process as best we can, and that's something we need to fight for. I consider the current submission from the offices, I know they've got a lot of work into it, but of over 15,000 homes, which represents a third of the current dwellings in the borough, unnecessarily high, and I have grave concerns over any development of greenfield sites and the green belt. So consequently, I'm happy to support this compromise recommendation of 13,277 homes. And should we vote on it now? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanbury. Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chairman. I've listened carefully to what everybody said tonight. And I mean, some of you will know I've been on this council for a very long time. Seems like half a lifetime, probably is. This is the most difficult decision I think the council's had to make in all that time. We have on the one hand an inspector who has given us the figures, 15,200. Remember, we had Turley's as our own consultants and they said 14,200. On the other hand, we have the residents who have been so strongly against this. And I expect for most councillors here, you have had more emails, phone calls, and even letters on this than you've had on anything else in the period you have been a councillor. So it's a very difficult decision. There is no doubt that we need housing. We are a bit behind in our housing, and it's a question of the numbers. There is no doubt that we have to build on the green belt. And even at 13,200 odd, we will be building substantially on the green belt. So it's not a question of being NIMBYs. It's a question of trying our best to preserve what we can. As far as Simonside goes, we did take that out a long time ago. And then we were told by the inspector that only he could take out sites. So it has sort of gone back in. And although some of us may be comfortable with that, because if you have 1,500 houses, you can do some real placemaking and you can build a new village and you get something really decent out of it. Others are less happy. And it's not just in this borough. This week, I have had numerous emails from people who live in the borough of St Albans because they say they use Simonside for recreation. And I'm sure there's many do that from out the borough as in the borough, as it's fairly close to the border of St Albans. So it's a difficult decision. I couldn't quite see where Jane was going with this, whether she thought 15,200 we should do or shouldn't do. And Pankit thinks probably we should. So, you know, we've all got different views on this and it's difficult to reconcile them all. We must listen to what Sue and Chris have said to us about the difficulties that may ensue with the inspector and with developers putting in unwelcome, I suppose, applications, which we could lose on appeal because we haven't got our 5-year land supply. It's already happened. It's happened with the 100 houses up at Bowman's Farmway. So we will be expecting more. It is a very difficult decision. And all I can do is leave you with that and ask you to make, you know, the best possible choice that is in front of you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hellier.
I agree that it is an extremely difficult decision. I have found myself agreeing with what Sonny has said. The numbers required are the numbers required by the inspector are extremely large. The number for 13,200 is also very large as is. You know, we've all sort of told our constituents that we want to have a balanced approach to planning, that we want to protect the green belt as much as possible, and this 15.2 doesn't do that. You know, there's not really anything left that could be found sound, it seems. And for the 13.2, yes, that eats a lot of the green belt anyway, but it at least spares something, even if it is not as much as we would like. As a committee, if we do want to protect the green belt in the future, when we go through this process again someday, then I think we need to look at how we consider density in our developments in general. And the only way we can really protect the green belt is with denser developments in the future. That would be getting us back to the sort of density of the classic design of Welwyn Garden City, for example, rather than the sort of 1960s density we've got right now. So I just wanted to make that point, that that's something that we're going to have to consider in the long run if we don't want to come back and go through this same process and this same rigmarole again in 10 years. So, but I will be supporting Sonny's motion.
Thank you, Councillor Hillier. Councillor Tusu and then Councillor Hayes, and then I hope at that point we're able to wrap this up. You're on mute, Councillor Tusu.
So sorry. She thought I'd learned by after this. Being that I made this proposal, I'm willing to give way to Councillor Hayes and then sort of summing it up, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Councillor Hayes, if you're happy with that.
Thank you, Councillor Tusu and Chair. I just want to come back to Councillor Bolton, if possible, as a cabinet member. The way I understand it is we are your cabinet panel and we make a recommendation to you. But if you believe the risk that what we make is too great, I believe it is in cabinet's gift to obviously change it and take another option to recommend to council. Correct me if I'm wrong on the legality of that, but I believe that's how it works. So although us as a cabinet panel are fully rejecting it, ultimately it will go to cabinet before to try and find a sound issue or decide whether they stand with us and then recommend to council to see where it goes from there.
I believe that's correct, but Councillor Bolton?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Hayes. It would go to cabinet for then a recommendation to council, and ultimately council will have the opportunity to say yes or no.
Great. Councillor Quinton?
Yes, I mean, it is very difficult. I remain concerned that all these sites that we are opposing building on may well come forward if we don't have a sound plan. We have spent years and years and years developing this plan to the extent that it is the longest running examined local plan in the country. Had we bitten the bullet a bit earlier, I wasn't actually on the committee at that stage, we could maybe have settled this with 14,000 dwellings several years ago. It seems very frustrating that we've been going on this so long. The inspector is abiding by the rules he understands, which have been set by national government policy. And I wanted to explore actually one option with Sue Tiley was, I had mentioned this to her, that at a 5-year review point, there might be an option to change the selection if we had reserved the sites we are unhappy about, like Simonside, until that 5-year point and had not taken it out of the green belt. I don't know if she wants to comment on that possibility.
Thank you. Sue?
Thank you. That is something that we have looked at. The legal advice we've received is that once land is removed from the green belt, it's very difficult to put it back in. But I'm not sure that that's ever been tested with a situation like Simonside when you're talking about a new settlement. I certainly think in terms of the last 5 years of the plan period, you would have, before you get to that point, you would have reviewed your plan should the numbers go down. So it could be that land taken out of the green belt would then become safeguarded land or reserved, but if circumstances change and development hasn't taken place, then I certainly think it is that you wouldn't have to proceed with sites identified in the last 5 years of the plan period. In order to ensure we maximise our 5-year land supply, most of the sites that we've identified do complete in years 6 to 10. So a lot of them will have already started. But if you have a site that's just in the last 5 years of the plan, then I think that's certainly an option to consider. It's certainly something I am prepared to put to the inspector as an option should members wish to vote on that. I hope that answers the question. But if not, I'm happy to clarify anything.
Thank you. Councillor Quinton, would you like to come back?
I just want to see if anyone else on this panel considers that a viable option, and maybe it is a middle way, rather than risking everything going to planning by appeal.
Sorry, just to be clear, you are you are trying to inquire about a middle way being accepting the 15,000 figure, 15,200 figure that the inspector would deem sound, with the view to potentially revisiting the figure after a particular period of time.
Put like that, it's yeah. I don't know. I would say just investigating options. I really.
Okay, fine. Councillor Platt.
Thank you, Chair. I won't take up much of your time. When I looked at options C and D, and probably people would think I'd have looked at the one where Broadwater Road was reduced from 2003 down to 1600, and perhaps I would jump for joy. But unfortunately, as an elected representative, my morals, ethics, responsibility, whatever you want to call it, doesn't end at the end of my road. And to get a reduction there at the expense of 1,500 dwellings in Simonside was not viable for me. So it wasn't as attractive as proposition as when I first saw that figure, even though that figure is a little higher than I wanted anyway. I would just like to clarify, because I'm fairly new to this, and perhaps Councillor Tusu might be able to help there. When Councillor Tusu is mentioning the 13,277, I think he said, is that a specific version of the plan that you are proposing we take? Because it would be very difficult for me, not having been part of it then, to know whether to support that or not, because without having seen the actual makeup of it and the figures within my ward. So I wonder if you could just clarify that for me.
I'm going to ask Sue to come in, and I saw a hand before, but Councillor Platt, that was a very reasonable question. In 2019, this panel voted on, passed or recommended a specific plan, and that was the figure attached to it. And then the inspector felt that the number was inadequate, which is why we're back here via Zoom, having this discussion and not watching Liverpool versus Arsenal. Sue, over to you. It would be good if you can, for the sake of Councillor Platt, give a bit more detail about what was recommended 2 years ago.
Okay, so following the call for sites, the council reviewed the suitability of additional sites to add into the plan, and a number of those were promoted, and as I said, consulted on in 2019 and 2020. If you look at Appendix D, you will see that the inspector found a number of the sites that we promoted to the inspector, which made up that 13,277, referred to. So if you look at Table 2, you will see there are a number of sites where they have a HELA reference, but they don't have a plan reference. So those are sites that have been added in. They include Town Centre North, the YMCA, which I think already has planning permission, Neighbourhood Centre in Hollybush Lane, Meridian House in Hatfield, Link Drive in Hatfield, Lemsford Road in Hatfield, Minster Close in Hatfield, College Lane in Hatfield. Then sites in the villages include Welham Green, WEG 1, WEG 3A, WEG 10, Little Heath 4 and 5. But they do also include sites which have been found unsound by the inspector, including BRP 1, a number of sites in the employment area, which in Welwyn Garden City as well. So that we know that the inspector has concerns about some of those sites. That may not be the entire list, but I think I've included the main sites that were included in that 13,277. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Great. I don't want us to go around in circles. I think everybody's had a chance to speak. What I will do is, and everyone's hands has come back up, I'm going to let Chris come back in. And then between Councillor Hayes and Councillor Shah, I'm going to let you decide which one of you, because of course you're both from the Labour group, would like to speak, and then we're going to go to a vote. So Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. It was just a point around checking my understanding around what the potential vote that the councillors might be moving towards is. The figure of 13,277 has been suggested by Councillor Thusu. Could I have clarification on what site allocations that that particular figure would be based on? Would it be based on the site allocations that have been previously brought before the inspector?
So I think so. Councillor Thusu is nodding, so the answer is yes. I think we're going to vote on three things. The two that were in the report and Councillor Thusu's recommendation as well. For the sake of clarity, I think it's easier if we go in that order, and so we can see where all the members of the panel stand.
So for clarity, Chris, I would like us to reconsider the original figures we gave him of 13,277 as per the CPP meeting recommended in November 2020.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, last comment, Councillor Hayes.
Thank you, Chair. There's just a couple of things. I was going to come back to Councillor Quintin about accepting the higher figure and then rolling the dice and getting a lower figure in the future to remove parts of the plan. However, if we did get the opportunity to remove in the future, they would always be classed as building land. So it would always eventually be built on it. No, it never goes back to Greenbelt, or it's very, very difficult to get it back to Greenbelt. But I do understand where she's coming from. And the other thing that just hit me, and this is a comment for the panel, it's a comment for everybody, I think, that's really involved in this, is since 2009, I think we've got to have spent nearly 15 million doing this, is it? Or is it 10 million? So it's a staggering amount of money. At the risk that we are most likely going to end up doing planning by appeal at more cost. Now, that's just a bit mind-blowing when you actually think about the implications of all that. However, there isn't a resident out there that's happy. I don't think there's a developer out there that's overly happy, apart from ones that are definitely guaranteed to build. So yeah, I think the only options we've got at the moment is just to throw it back at the inspector and say, this isn't right.
Okay. Councillor Quintin, I know your hand is still up and you were mentioned twice, so last word, over to you.
Right, thank you very much. I'll be brief. I mean, having heard everybody else, I don't feel I can support the option A to D because it does include Simonside or sites which are not really supportable. Yet I'm reluctant to support Councillor Thusu's proposal because I don't think that we previously voted against that because we didn't think the distribution in that proposal was correct, even though we'd love to have fewer numbers. So it's an odd situation we've been thrown into.
Thank you, Councillor Quintin. So just to summarise, based on the discussions we've had, the report from the officers and some of my own wider reflections, I think the key point to make here is that both the decision as to how many new houses are needed in the borough, i.e. the identification of the council's objective, assessed need or OAN, and the subsequent decision as to how many of those new homes the plan should deliver, i.e. the local plan requirement, are ultimately matters of planning judgment for the council. In other words, whilst the local plan inspector has made it absolutely clear that he would find the plan unsound unless it proposes to deliver at least 15,200 new homes, including substantial amounts of new housing in the Greenbelt, it is ultimately for the council to decide whether it wants to promote a plan that would achieve this figure. It follows that if councillors do not accept the OAN, should be 15,200 because, as many people have said today, they do not accept the assumptions the inspector has made as to future patterns of migration, future commuter patterns, and other factors, then it would be open to them to reject the inspector's position. This is because these sorts of issues ultimately turn on matters of planning judgment on which different people may reasonably disagree. Equally, even if the councillors were minded to accept the OAN is as high as 15,200, it would still be up to councillors to decide as a matter of planning judgment whether there are special circumstances to justify the release of Greenbelt land, both at the strategic level, which we're discussing today, and on a site-by-site basis. The important point to make here is that local plans do not have to meet the OAN, in my view, if doing so would cause unacceptable environmental harm. This includes harm to the Greenbelt. This is clear from paragraph 47 of the 2012 version of the MPPF against which the plan is being prepared. There's also a legal precedent for this in Compton Parish Council versus Guildford Borough Council. Drawing all of this together, it is plain that it is up to the council to decide whether it's acceptable to meet the OAN as high as 15,200, and it is up to the council to decide whether the level of housing need, whatever it considers it to be, is sufficient to justify the release of land from the Greenbelt. There are plenty of examples up and down the country of Greenbelt land being released through local plans. And of course, in our 2019 plan, we agreed to release some Greenbelt. But whether or not that is the appropriate course of action in this case, whether at the strategic or site-by-site level, is entirely a matter for the council to decide, having regard to harm of the Greenbelt. It follows that in response to the question, is it open to the council to reach a different view to the inspector? The answer, in my view, is yes. So on that note, we have 3 things that we are going to vote to recommend to Cabinet and then for them to recommend to full council. The first is to consider the results of the site selection addendum and the sustainability appraisal addendum and the merits and disadvantages of the different options. So can we agree for the Cabinet to note these things? And we are going to vote via show of hands. So if you agree for them to note that, please raise your hands. Physical hands, please, not virtual.
Yeah, I can confirm that's unanimous.
Okay. So the second thing we are voting on is, as mentioned in the report, that members accept the officer's recommendation set out in para 4.30 of the report and recommend to Cabinet and full council option D as set out in Appendix D to this report for submission to the examination along with the relevant supporting information. All in favour, please raise your hand. And just for clarity, this is the option D in the report, which would mean that we are effectively meeting the figure suggested by the inspector. Again, all in favour, please raise your hand.
Chair, to confirm, no one has raised their hand.
All against, please raise your hand.
I confirm, Chair, that's unanimous.
Thank you. And then the third and final thing that we will be voting on is the recommendation put forward by Councillor Thusu, which is that we recommend that the Cabinet revisit the figure of 13,377. Okay, wrong anybody. And just to correct you, Councillor Thusu, Cabinet will have to review all of the various sites within the envelope of that figure, because some sites were approved and not approved, etc. in 2019. So do we agree?
So a point of order, Chair. I think that's a motion. Do we not need a seconder?
Jonah.
We don't technically need a seconder, but if people would like to propose a second, then that's
okay.
fine.
But yeah, we can have a seconder. Anyone want to second that? Councillor Richardson.
I don't mind seconding.
Okay. So Councillor Thusu has proposed. Councillor Richardson has seconded. All in favour, please raise your hand.
I can confirm, Chair, we have 10 votes for.
Okay. All against, please raise your hand.
I confirm we have 2 votes against.
Abstentions, please raise your hand if you're abstaining.
And we have 1 vote to abstain.
Okay. Jonah, please can you confirm that all councillors have had their votes counted?
I confirm all councillors have had their votes counted.
Great, thank you. We have no urgent business, no agenda items that requires the exclusion of press or the public. So I now declare this meeting closed. Thank you all. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
See you next week.